All right, ladies and gentlemen, I am assuming at this point that you have read the first 9 chapters of the Kiterunner. And today I'm going to focus a little bit on the areas that you really should be considering as you are progressing. So the first thing we're going to talk a little bit about is the point of view. That is, who is telling us this story? And it's always important to consider this because it will help us to understand a little bit more about our narrator and the story that they are telling. So obviously we know by now that Amir, a young Afghan boy, is the narrator, and that this is being told in the first person. And obviously we know this simply by the use of the pronoun I. It's being told specifically from his point of view. And it's also important to consider at this point that Amir is the narrator and he is not an omniscient narrator, meaning that he doesn't know what the other characters are thinking or feeling, that our perception or perspective is limited very much to what Amir thinks, feels, and knows. The next question I asked you to consider is if the action was being written as Amir experiences it. Is it a young Afghan boy that's actually our narrator? The answer is no, it is not. Amir is actually telling the story as an adult, and this is made very apparent to us from the very first page of the novel. All right, so what does this mean? Well, it means that we are actually getting a better perspective or a little bit wiser perspective than we would have had if it was actually a young Afghan boy writing about the action as he experienced it. Instead, it was being told in a way that the author could look back. And if we think about things in our lives that we've experienced, we certainly have a different perspective on them several years after they've happened. We have an idea of why we may have done what we have done. We have an idea why people may have done what they have done. We are actually removed a bit from the action and able to be a little bit more insightful. And that's our narrator. He's definitely more insightful. Okay? So what is that called? This point of view is called the first person retrospective, meaning it's the first person looking back. Now this is an important term for you to be aware of and to make a note of, because I guarantee you it's going to be on a quiz, it's going to be on a test. It's an important aspect of this novel that it is in fact the first person retrospective. The next thing we're going to focus on is characterization. Now overall, guys, characterization is what the author engages in, what the author does to make his characters or her characters lifelike and believable. All right? And we've all experienced this at one time or another, even in a movie or a book or in some way, where your character is someone you feel like you know, that you can be angry at, you can be happy for, that you can feel sadness, and all of these different things because the character seems like a real person to you. All right? And there are 2 different particular kinds of characterization. And these kinds of characterization are actually listed on the glossary in the literary analysis term sheet. The first is direct characterization. And this is actually what a character says or does. All right? And obviously sometimes actions speak louder than words. If we know that a certain character does something, it will tell us something about that character. For instance, we're told that Baba, he actually built an orphanage. That tells us something about him, the kind of man he is. Okay? The other type is indirect characterization. And this is what a character or other characters say about or to a character. Okay? So it obviously, quite a bit of our novel is going to be indirect characterization because we are seeing and we're finding out about different characters through a narrator, through Amir, and Amir's telling us about different characters. So some of what we know about the characters is obviously going to be indirect characterization because we're getting it from Amir, and this is indirect. Understand, though, that no character is described by just direct or indirect characterization. because we still have that aspect of direct. We have the idea of what the character does, not just what we're being told about the character. And even understand this, our narrator, Amir, is also described by direct and indirect characterization. And it can't really actually be helped, because not only do we find out about Amir from what he's saying about himself, but we also find out about Amir by what he does. The things that he does tell us things about him, sometimes not so great things, okay? So every character has both direct and indirect characterization. Now guys, because this is a blended class, some of the things that we would have done or we would do together, I'm going to ask you to complete independently. Now we will come together and we will discuss these things, but I want to give you a head start so you have sufficient time. So I would like you to complete an analysis. Now what does that mean? Do I want a complete paper? No, I want notes. If they're handwritten, that's okay. If you feel more comfortable typing things out and printing them and bringing them in, that's okay too. But please understand I will be checking them. So what do I want you to do? Well, the first thing I want you to do is actually do a little bit of a characterization study, okay? And we just talked about characterization and what that is. I would like you to look at Amir and give me an analysis of direct and indirect characterization. What does that mean? Well, what kind of character is Amir? What are his strengths? What are his weaknesses? And you should have an example, one example of direct and indirect characterization to back up what you're saying about him. Okay? And if you want a length, maybe a paragraph, but it doesn't have to be a complete paragraph. It can be bullet points. You just need to be able to discuss Amir and the type of person he is based on indirect and direct characterization. Also, please do the same with Hassan. What kind of character is Hassan? How do you know? And finally, Baba. Baba, Amir's father, I want you to do an analysis of him using direct and indirect characterization, as well as 2 additional characters. Okay? So please be sure that you look at them according to characterization. Please again bring your notes to class. We will discuss the topics and your notes will be checked for completion. Now, I'm not just asking you to do the characterization study. That's one part of the novel that you should be focusing on. The next part I would like you to focus on is foreshadowing. Foreshadowing is a super important part of this novel. And the reason foreshadowing, I think, exists to such an extent is because we have that retrospective narrator. As Amir's telling his story, he's thinking about things that are happening in the novel, and he's kind of giving us hints. And that's what foreshadowing is. If you look at my official definition here, the presentation of details, characters, or incidents in a narrative in such a way that later events are prepared for or shadowed forth. I like to use the term hints. There are hints in this novel that tell us about certain things that will happen. And I have found 8 instances of foreshadowing in the first 9 chapters. I would like you to try to find them. Find as many as you can. Please don't take 7 hours looking for them. If you can find 5, that's fine. But try to find as many of these as you can. The next thing I'd like you to focus on or think about is internal and external conflict. Okay? And let's kind of talk first of all about what those things are. Internal conflict is a problem or an issue that is emotional in nature. They're things that exist within the characters that the characters actually have to overcome or rise above. Okay? And also, external conflict, these are when problems or issues are outside of the actual character. For instance, it could be a villain in a superhero movie, or it could be a natural disaster or some sort of conflict that actually exists outside the character that cause problems or issues that that character has to overcome. So there are many of them in the Kite Runner, and I do mean many. So what I'd like you to do is try to list 4 of those. And it doesn't have to be 2 internal and 2 external. Do it however you would like. If you have 4 internal conflicts, list them. If you have, 4 external, list them. Do it however you would see fit, but I want you to kind of start thinking about the conflicts that do exist. And those are the areas I want you to focus on, guys. So when you come to class, I want you to have your notes and I want you to be prepared to discuss these different things. If you have a problem or you're not quite sure what indirect characterization is, or direct characterization, or any of the other terms that I've discussed here, please let me know. In other words, this is where we are going to focus for the first 9 chapters, and most likely these different things are going to be coming up throughout the novel. All right, I hope you're enjoying it, and I look forward to our discussion.